So which is better for Odette, her constellations or her signature weapon? In this video we'll be going through all of her constellations, we're going to explain how they work and what do they give you, and also how much damage increase they're going to give to your team, and then finally we're going to compare that to her signature weapon, and I'll give you guys the best wish and roadmap for Odette. So yeah, let's begin. C1 is basically just going to give you damage after you do your special elemental skill. You're going to be able to deal an extra instance of cryo AoE damage that's going to be either considered stellar conduct reaction damage with 300% of your attack, or stellar swirl reaction damage at 450% of your attack. So it's gonna be kind of like a final nuke, but it's just simple extra damage whenever you use your special elemental skill. C1 is also gonna buff your passive, so now whenever you summon your double thing on the field, you're not only gonna get 4 stacks, you're gonna get an extra 2 stacks, so it's gonna be a total of 6 stacks. And then whenever you're off field, obviously it's gonna speed up how fast you lose the stacks and give them to your team. So it's just more stacks and easier time transferring them to your teammates, which is pretty good. Obviously more stacks also means more buffs to your teammates, so that's going to result in a decent damage increase. Overall, this constellation with Odette's extra damage, the extra damage bonus you give to your teammates and stuff like that, it's going to result in around a 9.5 damage increase team-wide as like an average in Odette's most common teams, mainly just Sandroni teams with some teammates change, but this is going to be the average. It's going to be the same for all of the calculations. But yeah, 9.5 damage increase is definitely going to be decent, especially considering it's a team-wide damage increase. It's not only for Odette herself. So yeah, that's it for C1. Now C2 is going to be a big buff to her stacks in general. First of all, it's going to add an attack buff to your teammates whenever they have her stacks. So instead of only increasing their stellar glimmer reaction damage, now it's going to give them 7% attack for each stack. And that's going to be a huge attack increase. They can have up to 42% attack, which is pretty good. Additionally, when she's in the stellar glimmer state, whether it's the stellar conduct or stellar swirl states, and whenever she has her solo dance double on the field, opponents near her double are going to have their resistance shredded depending on what state she's in. So if it's the stellar conduct, she's going to lower the resistance for cryo and electro by 20%, and if it's the stellar swirl, it's going to lower their resistance to cryo or anemo by 20%, and that's going to be super valuable. C2 is probably honestly one of the best constellations we've seen in a while, especially for a support character. On top of all her previous support, it also adds attack and also resistance shred, which is pretty simple but also pretty effective and valuable. But yeah, it's mainly just like a supportive constellation, and obviously that's going to result in a huge damage increase to your whole team. C2 is going to result in around a 25% damage increase to your whole team in general as like an average. It might be a little less obviously depending on the team and stuff like that, but in general that's going to be the number, and that's pretty huge for a constellation. So yeah, C2 is definitely an S tier constellation in my opinion. Now C3 is just going to increase the level of your elemental skill, and that's mainly just like the multipliers of her own personal damage. She does deal decent damage in the team in general, but it's not going to be like a huge increase. I would say it's better than most like level constellations. The multipliers are going to be pretty good, but in general it's not going to be all of that. It's going to result in around a 5% damage increase team-wide, which is still pretty decent, but it's nothing special. Now C4 is mainly just going to buff her burst. So now her burst buff, the stellar reactions damage buff that Odette gets after using her elemental burst, half of it is also going to be applied to her teammates, not only Odette. So for example, at level 8, if Odette has 42% stellar reaction damage increase, her teammates are going to have 21%, which is still pretty good. It's just going to make her burst much more useful. Honestly, in a lot of like rotations, it's probably not even optimal to actually use her burst, but C4 definitely makes her burst much more useful and you'd want to use it. C4 is also going to provide you with some extra damage, so whenever any party member deals stellar glimmer damage, whether it's stellar conduct or stellar swirl, that is also going to join in with some extra attacks. They're going to be kind of low multipliers, but it's just extra damage, so it doesn't hurt. But mainly C4 is just going to make her burst much more supportive, just going to make it much more valuable, and it's also going to give you some extra damage. With all that being said though, C4 is not going to be like a super huge damage increase, simply because the stellar damage bonus is not really going to be a scarce thing in like Odette's teams, so kind of has like some diminishing returns, and it's not really going to be affecting the team-wide damage as much. It's going to result in around a 5% damage increase, which is not terrible but also not the best thing, so it's like a fine constellation in my opinion. C5 is going to increase the level of your elemental burst. That's going to increase the burst multiplier, so obviously the damage is going to be increased by a little bit, but mostly it's also going to increase the bonus you give to your teammates. It's going to increase it by like 6% for each teammate, like the stellar glimmer reaction damage bonus, which is not really huge, but it's something for a second level constellation. It's definitely pretty good. Usually those are like 1% damage increase. This is a 2.5% team-wide damage increase, which is, you know, decent in my opinion. Don't get me wrong, it's still a terrible constellation, but it's not too terrible compared to like the usual level constellations. And I'm finally moving on to her C6. C6 is also going to buff your passive. That gives you the stacks. So whenever you give your party members members the full stacks. Whenever Odette gives all of her stacks to the nearby party members, her own stacks will no longer decrease, so they're basically gonna freeze. Now, how this exactly works, I'm not fully sure, but I would assume they're gonna freeze at 0 at first, so it's gonna give you full uptime to your teammates, and the stack timer is not gonna run out after, you know, your elemental skill thing leaves the field. So I think that basically just guarantees full uptime of the stacks to your whole teammates and Odette herself. This is what I assumed, and that's probably the case. Correct me if I'm wrong. But the most important part about C6 is gonna be that the characters affected by those stacks, they're gonna have their stellar glimmer reaction damage elevated by 25%. And Odette is also gonna have her own damage elevated by only 20%. So saying elevated, it doesn't mean 20% or 25% stellar reactions damage bonus like the previous buffs, because as I explained and you guys saw before, it's gonna reach a certain point where it's gonna be like diminishing returns. Just stacking many buffs at the same multiplier is not gonna be as valuable. Elevated is gonna be a completely separate multiplier. Same thing with the lunar reaction damage elevated. We've seen it in a couple characters' constellations. But yeah, basically it's just a completely separate multiplier. The easiest way to explain it is that it's basically a pure 25% damage increase. So whatever damage is outputted from the previous multipliers is gonna be increased by 25%, which is obviously super good. It's gonna raise the team's damage by a huge amount and also raise Odette's own damage, which is pretty valuable, obviously. C6 in general is gonna result in around a 34% damage increase team-wide, which is huge. And I'm pretty glad it also fits her role. I really hate when characters just get like turned into a main DPS from their C6. She's a support. She got a good support C6, which is much better in my opinion. So yeah, I really like C6. I think it's one of the best C6s we've seen in a while too. So those are the constellations. Now moving on to her signature weapon. We're gonna see what it gives and if it's comparable to her constellations and if it's worth going for. So her signature weapon is gonna give you 674 base attack at level 90, 22% crit rate from the substat. Those are gonna be the base stats for the weapon. Pretty simple, pretty good. For the passive is simply just whenever you hit an opponent with your elemental skill, it's gonna give you 8% attack with a maximum of 3 stacks, so that can easily max this out. And she's gonna have an extra 24% attack. Attack is also gonna be pretty valuable, so yeah. And then the weapon can also give you an extra 50% crit damage to your stellar damage. So it's also gonna increase Odette's stellar damage by a little bit, which is also pretty good. So whenever you have the 3 stacks, your crit damage is also gonna be increased. And Odette is gonna have no problems having full uptime on this. And then also whenever you trigger those reactions, you're gonna restore 4 energy, and you can do that every 3.5 seconds. So it can also give her a decent amount of energy. Now, as you guys can see here, unfortunately, the biggest problem in my opinion about this weapon is that it doesn't really have any supportive capabilities, and for a support character, I mean, Odette is a sub DPS slash support, but mainly as like a support character. And the weapon not having any supportive capabilities, it just makes it like kind of a good stat stick, honestly. Besides like buffing the stellar damage, it doesn't really matter as much. It's just gonna give you the crit rate, attack, which are basically just stat stick things. The crit damage increase is pretty good, but Odette's damage is not like the main thing about her. And then energy, she doesn't really need it that much. As I said before, in some rotations before C4, she doesn't even need to use her burst, so it's definitely not something you want to worry about. So this weapon's team damage increase is gonna be around 4 to 6%, obviously depending on which weapon you had before. If you had like good 5-star weapons, I did a weapons tier list before if you want to check it out, but if you have like good 5-star weapons, then it's gonna be around a 4% damage increase over those weapons. But if you had the free-to-play Emberwell, it's also only gonna be around a 6% damage increase, which is pretty low in my opinion. So obviously for the main conclusions, just simply comparing the numbers, it's pretty easy to see which should you go for. C1 just gives like almost double the damage increase that the weapon is gonna give you. C2 gives a ridiculously better amount, and even C3, C4, whatever are gonna be comparable. So for final wish and roadmap, I would recommend for Odette, I would say you definitely want to get her C1 and C2 first. There's really no debate about that. They're just simply much better than the weapon. I don't think the weapon is worth it. You can always go grab the free-to-play weapon and you're good. Now after C2, it kind of depends a little bit, I would say. If you only have one extra thing, so you can either go for C3 or for the weapon then stop, then I would recommend going for the weapon then stopping, because they're going to be pretty comparable, and then getting the weapon is just usually simply better, because at the end of the day, it's a weapon on your account and stuff like that. So if they're comparable or near each other, the weapon is always going to be like the right choice. But if you're planning to get more things, if you want to get 2 things, 3 things more, or even up to C6, then I would recommend continuing to go for the constellations. So just start with C1, C2, then you either get R1 and stop, or just continue getting the constellations. This is the best wish and roadmap for Odette in my opinion. But yeah, tell me what you guys are going to be getting in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel. See you guys in the next video. Peace.